On the morning of August 9, 1945, Lieutenant Takeshi Yamada of the Imperial Japanese Army stood in a communications bunker on Tinian Island, holding a canvas bag filled with intercepted American letters. His orders were clear: burn them. Destroy all enemy correspondence to prevent intelligence gathering and maintain operational security. It was standard procedure, repeated hundreds of times across the Pacific theater. But Takeshi couldn't do it. Not anymore. Not after reading them. The bag contained 347 letters written by American mothers to their sons serving in the Pacific. Letters that had been captured when Japanese forces overran a mail depot near Saipan 3 months earlier. Letters that, according to military protocol, should have been destroyed immediately or sent to intelligence for analysis. Takeshi had read every single one, and that decision would cost him everything. To understand why a career military officer would risk court-martial over enemy mail, we need to go back to 1932, to a small farming village outside Hiroshima, where a 12-year-old boy named Takeshi Yamada learned the most important lesson of his life from his mother. Takeshi's mother, Keiko, was a gentle woman who ran the village's only school. She taught children to read and write, but more importantly, she taught them compassion. Her favorite lesson involved a simple exercise. She would have students write letters to imaginary people in distant places, then exchange letters and respond as if they were those distant people. Words carry souls, she would tell her students. When you write with honesty, part of your spirit travels with those words. When you read someone's letter, you touch their soul. This is why letters are sacred, no matter who writes them. Young Takeshi loved these exercises. He would write elaborate letters to imaginary friends in China, America, and Europe, describing his village, his family, his dreams. His mother kept every letter he wrote, storing them in a wooden box she'd made herself. Someday, she told him, you'll read these and remember who you were. Never forget that boy, Takeshi. No matter what life brings, never forget the boy who wrote these letters. In 1937, when Japan's war with China escalated, Takeshi was 17 and filled with patriotic fervor. Against his mother's wishes, he enlisted in the Imperial Army. Keiko said nothing as he left, but she gave him the wooden box containing all his childhood letters. "Keep these," she said. "Read them when you forget why words matter." Takeshi promised he would, though he thought it a strange request. He was going to war. What did childhood letters matter now? The China campaign changed him, as war changes everyone. Takeshi learned to follow orders without question, to see the enemy as less than human, to accept brutality as necessity. He was good at it, too good. By 1940, he'd earned promotion to lieutenant and a reputation as a reliable, efficient officer who never hesitated. His mother's letters arrived regularly, but Takeshi rarely responded. What could he tell her? The truth would break her heart. Lies felt disrespectful, so he wrote brief, formal notes acknowledging receipt of her letters and assuring her of his health. Nothing more. In December 1941, when Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, Takeshi was stationed in Manchuria. He was transferred to the Pacific Theater in 1942, participating in operations across New Guinea, the Solomon Islands, and eventually the Mariana Islands. He saw combat, survived it, and stopped counting the dead. By 1944, Takeshi commanded a communications unit on Tinian Island, responsible for intercepting and analyzing enemy transmissions. It was technical work, relatively safe, and it suited him. He'd grown tired of fighting, though he'd never admit that aloud. When American forces invaded Tinian in July 1944, Takeshi's unit was among the last to evacuate. In the chaos, they discovered an abandoned American mail depot near the beach. Standard procedure: destroy everything. Deny the enemy any intelligence value. But Takeshi's commanding officer, Colonel Watanabe, had a different idea. "Bring it all," he ordered. "Intelligence might find something useful. Radio codes, troop movements, operational details hidden in seemingly innocent letters." So Takeshi's men loaded canvas bags with thousands of letters and transported them to their fallback position. When Tinian fell completely to American forces, those letters came with the retreating Japanese to their next defensive position. Months passed. The war turned increasingly desperate for Japan. American bombers darkened the skies. Supply lines collapsed. Starvation became routine. In this chaos, the captured letters sat forgotten in a corner of Takeshi's bunker. Until one sleepless night in May 1945, when Takeshi, unable to sleep and tormented by nightmares, decided to sort through them. Perhaps there would be intelligence value. Perhaps it would give him something to do besides think about how the war was clearly lost. He opened the first letter randomly. It was from a woman named Dorothy Miller in Kansas City, Missouri, written to her son, James, who was serving with the Marines. "My dearest Jimmy," it began, "your father and I received your letter from April 3rd. We were so relieved to know you're safe. I read it 3 times, just to hear your voice in my head. I know you can't tell us where you are or what you're doing, but knowing you took time to write means everything." Takeshi almost put it down. This was pointless. What intelligence could this possibly contain? But something made him continue. "Your sister Mary had her baby last week. A beautiful girl, 8 pounds, healthy and strong. They named her Dorothy, after me. I cried when Mary told me. She says, when you come home, you'll be Uncle Jimmy. You'll spoil her terribly, I'm sure, just like you spoiled all the neighborhood children before you left. I think about you every morning when I wake up and every night before I sleep. Your father pretends he's not worried, but I catch him staring at your photo when he thinks I'm not looking. We keep your room exactly as you left it. Sometimes I go in there and sit on your bed, just to feel close to you. Please be safe, Jimmy. I know you're fighting for something important. I know you believe in it. But to me, you're not a Marine or a soldier. You're my little boy who used to catch fireflies in the backyard and cry when he had to let them go. Come home to us. That's all I ask. Just come home." Takeshi sat in the dim bunker, reading this stranger's words to her son, and felt something crack inside his chest. He thought of his own mother, who probably wrote similar words in her letters to him, words he barely read, barely acknowledged. He opened another letter, then another, and another. Each one was the same, not in content, but in essence. Mothers writing to sons, wives writing to husbands, sisters writing to brothers, all saying the same thing in different words. I love you. I miss you. Please come home safe. There was no intelligence value, no radio codes, no troop movements, no operational details. Just love, just desperate, aching love from people who wanted their soldiers to survive. Takeshi read through the night. By dawn, he'd read perhaps 50 letters. Each one felt like a knife sliding between his ribs. Because these American mothers sounded exactly like his own mother. Their fears were his mother's fears. Their love was his mother's love. The realization was devastating. The men he'd spent years learning to hate, learning to kill, were loved by mothers who wrote letters just like his mother's letters. The enemy had mothers who waited for letters, who kept their sons' rooms unchanged, who prayed for safe returns. How had he never considered this? How had he spent 8 years at war without once thinking about the mothers on the other side? Takeshi found the wooden box his mother had given him in 1937. He hadn't opened it since leaving home. Inside were his childhood letters, written to imaginary friends in distant lands. Letters filled with curiosity about other people, other cultures. Letters written by a boy who saw the world as full of potential friends, not enemies. "Never forget the boy who wrote these letters," his mother had said. Takeshi had forgotten him completely. The boy who wrote those letters would be horrified by the man Takeshi had become. Over the following weeks, Takeshi continued reading the American letters. Not for intelligence purposes. He'd abandoned that pretense. He read them because they were the only honest things in his world. Everyone around him spoke in propaganda and denial, insisting Japan would prevail, that the Americans would surrender, that victory was inevitable. But these letters told the truth. They revealed the American soldiers as human beings with families, dreams, fears. They made it impossible to maintain the comfortable fiction that the enemy was somehow less than human. Takeshi started responding. Not sending his responses, that would be impossible, but writing them anyway, as if he could somehow reach these American mothers and tell them, what? That he understood? That he was sorry? That he hoped their sons survived? He wrote dozens of these unsent letters. "Dear Mrs. Miller, I read your letter to Jimmy. I hope he knows how lucky he is to have a mother who loves him so completely. My own mother writes similar words to me, though I have been a poor son in not appreciating them. It was therapeutic and torturous in equal measure. Each letter he read, each response he wrote, made the war's reality more unbearable. These weren't enemies. They were sons, husbands, brothers. Just like him. Just like his fellow soldiers." In early August 1945, Colonel Watanabe finally remembered the captured letters. With the war situation deteriorating daily, he ordered all non-essential materials destroyed. That included enemy correspondence. "Burn them," he told Takeshi. "All of them. We can't risk them falling back into American hands if we have to evacuate again." Takeshi stared at the canvas bags. 347 letters. 347 pieces of souls, as his mother would say. 347 American mothers who had poured their love into words, sending those words across an ocean to sons who might never return. "Burn them," Watanabe repeated. "That's an order, Lieutenant." Takeshi should have obeyed. He'd followed orders for 8 years. This was a simple command, tactically sound, militarily justified. Burn enemy correspondence to maintain security. Standard procedure. But he couldn't do it. Not these letters. Not after reading them. Not after understanding what they represented. "Sir," Takeshi said carefully, "these letters have no intelligence value. They're personal correspondence from families. Perhaps we could—" "Burn them," Watanabe cut him off. "I don't care what they contain. They're enemy property. Destroy them." That night, Takeshi was supposed to burn the letters. He gathered them, prepared the fire, stood there with kerosene and matches. His men waited, ready to help. Takeshi couldn't do it. The thought of burning these mothers' words, of destroying these pieces of souls, was unbearable. It felt like the final surrender of his own humanity. If he could burn these letters after reading them, after understanding what they meant, then he truly had become the machine the war wanted him to be. He made a decision that he knew would have severe consequences. He sent his men away, claiming he would handle it alone. Then, instead of burning the letters, he hid them. He buried them in a sealed container outside the bunker, marking the location carefully. If the Americans retook this position, and they would, eventually, they would find their letters. They would go home to mothers who had written them. Takeshi couldn't send them himself, but he could preserve them. That felt important. Essential, even. When Colonel Watanabe inspected the next day, Takeshi reported the letters destroyed. Watanabe nodded, satisfied, and moved on to other matters. For 3 days, Takeshi thought he'd gotten away with it. Then a junior officer, suspicious of Takeshi's recent behavior, did some investigating. He found the buried container. He reported it to Watanabe. The colonel was furious. Disobeying a direct order was bad enough. Lying about it was worse. But preserving enemy correspondence? That bordered on treason. You buried them. Watanabe's voice was dangerously quiet. You buried enemy letters instead of burning them? Why? Takeshi could have made excuses, could have claimed he planned to analyze them further, could have invented tactical reasons. Instead, he told the truth. Because they're from mothers to sons, he said simply. I read them. They sound exactly like letters from our own mothers. I couldn't burn them. It felt wrong. Watanabe stared at him. Wrong? We're at war, Lieutenant. The enemy wants to destroy Japan. These letters are enemy property. These letters, Takeshi said quietly, are mothers loving their sons. That's not enemy activity. That's just human. You're relieved of command, Watanabe said. Confined to quarters, pending disciplinary action. In the small room where Takeshi was confined, he had time to think. He knew what was coming. Military discipline in the Imperial Army was harsh. Disobeying orders could mean execution, especially this late in the war when morale was critical and examples needed to be made. He wasn't afraid of dying. 8 years of war had worn away most of his fear. But he was afraid of dying without telling his mother what he'd learned, without apologizing for becoming someone she wouldn't recognize. Takeshi wrote one final letter, not to his commanding officer, not to defend himself, to his mother. Dear Mother, he wrote, I'm writing this, knowing I may not survive to send it, but needing to write it anyway. You were right about letters. They carry souls. I forgot that for many years, but I remember now. I've done things in this war that would break your heart. I became efficient at cruelty. I stopped seeing the enemy as human. I forgot the boy who wrote those childhood letters you saved for me. But recently, I read letters written by American mothers to their sons. They sounded exactly like your letters to me. I realized that the men I've been fighting, the men I've killed, are loved by mothers just like you. I couldn't unknow that, once I knew it. I disobeyed an order to burn these letters. I preserved them instead, hoping they might reach the families who wrote them. This will probably cost me everything, but I think you would understand. You taught me that words carry souls. I couldn't destroy souls, not even enemy souls. If this is the last letter I write, I want you to know. I remembered the boy I was. In the end, I tried to honor what you taught me. I'm sorry it took me so long. I'm sorry I forgot for so many years. But I remembered. Mother, I remembered. Thank you for saving my letters. Thank you for reminding me that words matter. Thank you for being the kind of mother who writes the kind of letters that American mothers write to their sons. Your love kept me human, even when I tried to stop being human. I hope this reaches you. I hope you know that I died remembering who you raised me to be. That feels important. Takeshi never got to send that letter. On August 9th, 1945, the same day he finished writing it, the atomic bomb fell on Nagasaki. Takeshi's position wasn't directly hit, but the shock wave from the blast was devastating. The bunker collapsed. 17 men died instantly, including Lieutenant Takeshi Yamada. When American forces secured the area days later, they found the buried container with the letters. They also found Takeshi's body, still clutching his final letter to his mother, and the wooden box of childhood letters. A Marine chaplain, Captain Robert Morrison, was processing personal effects from Japanese casualties. He spoke some Japanese, enough to read Takeshi's final letter. He was moved enough to include it in his report. Found on enemy lieutenant, Morrison wrote, letter to his mother. He preserved American mail against orders because the letters reminded him of his own mother's letters. He died for it, essentially. Thought this was worth noting. Even the enemy has mothers who write letters. Even the enemy has sons who remember what their mothers taught them. Morrison packaged Takeshi's effects, his final letter, the wooden box, his identification papers, and sent them through channels to occupation authorities in Japan, hoping they might reach his family. In late 1946, Takeshi's mother, Keiko, received a package from American occupation forces. It contained her son's belongings and his final letter. She read it alone in the classroom where she'd taught Takeshi and hundreds of other children about the sacredness of words. She cried, but not entirely from grief. Her son had remembered. In the end, he'd remembered who he was. That mattered more than she could express. Keiko wrote a response, knowing Takeshi would never read it, but needing to write it anyway. My dear Takeshi, she wrote, your final letter reached me. I want you to know, you didn't fail me. You became what war made you become, but you found your way back. That took more courage than surviving. You saved those American letters because you remembered that words carry souls. You refused to destroy souls. That's who I raised you to be. That's who you were, underneath everything war tried to make you. I'm proud of you. Not for the medals, or the rank, or the years of service. I'm proud because you remembered. Because when it mattered most, you chose humanity over orders. Because you died being the boy who wrote those letters, not the soldier who forgot them. Rest peacefully, my son. You came home to yourself before you died. That's all any mother can ask. The American letters that Takeshi saved were eventually returned to families. Not all of them. Many of the addressed soldiers had died in combat, but enough. Some families received letters they'd written years earlier, never knowing whether their sons had received them. One of those families was Dorothy Miller's. Her son James had survived the war. In 1947, she received her April 1944 letter back, along with a note from the Army explaining it had been recovered from a Japanese position and preserved by an enemy officer who'd been killed for refusing to destroy it. Dorothy kept that letter in a frame for the rest of her life. Not because of what she'd written, but because a Japanese soldier she'd never meet had died believing her words were sacred enough to save. In 1995, 50 years after the war's end, a Japanese-American researcher named Emily Nakamura was investigating Pacific War archives when she discovered Morrison's report about Takeshi Yamada. Intrigued, she tracked down what remained of his story. She found Keiko's response letter in family archives. She found Morrison's chaplain reports. She found several of the American families who'd received their letters back and learned the story behind their preservation. Emily compiled everything into a book, Letters Across Battle Lines, the story of Lieutenant Takeshi Yamada. It was published in 1998 in both English and Japanese. The book raised an uncomfortable question. How many soldiers on all sides maintained their humanity against enormous pressure to abandon it? How many small acts of conscience went unrecorded because they seemed insignificant against the war's massive scale? One of Emily's interviewees was James Miller, son of Dorothy Miller. He was 74 years old when they spoke, his mother having passed away in 1989. "I didn't know about the Japanese officer until after my mother died," James said. "She never told me. But she kept that letter framed, and now I know why. Some guy she never met, whose country was trying to kill me, thought her words to me were worth dying for. How do you process that? My mother used to say that wars are fought by countries but lived by people. I didn't understand what she meant until I learned about Lieutenant Yamada. He wasn't my enemy. He was another son with a mother who wrote him letters. We just ended up on different sides." Emily asked him if knowing this story changed how he thought about the war. James was quiet for a long moment. "Yeah," he finally said. "It makes it sadder somehow. All those mothers writing letters, all those sons reading them or not reading them or dying before they could read them. All that love crossing oceans, trying to keep people alive. That Japanese lieutenant read my mother's letter to me. He understood what she felt because his own mother felt the same thing. And he died because he couldn't bring himself to destroy that understanding. That's not enemy action. That's... I don't know what that is. Humanity, I guess? Even in a war." The story of Takeshi Yamada raises uncomfortable questions about war, duty, and conscience. He was a career military officer who'd spent 8 years following orders, participating in brutal campaigns, learning to see enemies as less than human. But when confronted with evidence that those enemies had mothers who loved them exactly as his own mother loved him, he couldn't maintain that dehumanization. His choice cost him his command, his career, and ultimately his life. Was it worth it? From a purely military standpoint, no. He died for enemy mail with no tactical value. He disobeyed orders that were entirely reasonable from a security perspective. But from a human standpoint, perhaps it was worth everything. Because Takeshi died, having reclaimed something he'd lost. His ability to recognize souls in words, to see humanity in enemies, to honor the lesson his mother had taught him about the sacredness of honest communication. The 347 letters he saved eventually reached families. Some brought closure. Some reopened wounds. All reminded recipients that their words had mattered, had carried across vast distances, had touched souls even in unlikely places. Takeshi's final letter to his mother became part of peace education programs in Japan. Students read it as an example of the internal struggle soldiers face between duty and conscience, between orders and humanity, between being a good soldier and being a good person. One student, after reading Takeshi's letter, wrote in an essay, "Lieutenant Yamada shows us that even in war, we can choose who we become. He chose to remember his mother's lessons. He chose to see enemies as human. He chose to preserve love letters instead of destroying them. These seem like small choices, but they cost him everything. That makes them the biggest choices possible." Keiko Yamada lived until 1963, long enough to see her son's story become known, long enough to know that his final act of conscience wasn't forgotten. Before she died, she donated Takeshi's childhood letters, the ones in the wooden box, to a peace museum in Hiroshima. "These letters," she wrote in the donation note, "were written by a boy who saw the world as full of friends, not enemies. My son forgot that boy for many years, but he remembered him before he died. I want other children to read these letters and remember that we all start as that boy, open, curious, seeing other people as potential friends. War teaches us to forget. Remembering is the hardest battle." The wooden box sits in the museum today, next to Takeshi's final letter and several of the American letters he saved. Visitors can read them all. Many do, and many leave in tears. Because the story isn't about heroism or glory or tactical brilliance. It's about a simple truth that war tries desperately to make us forget. The people we're taught to kill have mothers who write them letters. Those letters sound exactly like letters from our own mothers. And once you truly understand that, once you really see it, you can't unknow it. Takeshi Yamada tried to unknow it for 8 years. He succeeded, mostly. He became an efficient officer, a reliable soldier, a man who followed orders without hesitation. But then he read those American letters, and all the barriers he'd built collapsed. He couldn't burn them, not because they had intelligence value, not because destroying them was tactically wrong, but because they carried souls, and he remembered, finally, completely, that souls are sacred, even enemy souls, especially enemy souls, because recognizing enemy humanity is the hardest thing war asks us to forget. Takeshi died on August 9, 1945, the same day the atomic bomb fell on Nagasaki. The war would end 5 days later. He never knew how close he came to surviving. But perhaps that doesn't matter, because he didn't die as the soldier war had tried to make him. He died as the boy his mother had raised, the boy who believed words carry souls, who thought letters were sacred, who couldn't destroy love even when ordered to. In the end, that's the victory that matters. Not military victory, not tactical success. The small, personal victory of dying as yourself, instead of as what war wanted you to become. Takeshi's mother understood that. "You came home to yourself before you died," she wrote. "That's all any mother can ask." For the American mothers whose letters Takeshi saved, he was an enemy who'd preserved their words when he should have destroyed them. For his own mother, he was a son who'd remembered her lessons when he could have forgotten them. For all of us looking back, he's a reminder that maintaining humanity in war requires constant, conscious choice. Sometimes that choice costs everything. Takeshi paid with his command, his career, his life. But he died being who he was supposed to be. And those 347 letters reached their families because one enemy soldier remembered that words carry souls, and souls, even enemy souls, are worth preserving. That's not a war story. That's a human story that happened to occur during war. And human stories, as Takeshi's mother taught him, are the only ones that really matter.